Respected doctors, seniors, and my friends, I have absolutely no clue as to why I was selected for this slaughter, except that I have transcended into old age. I will start by a confession that the only reason that I have come is that over the years you have to know doctors if you want to stay live longer. But we move from gynecologists and pediatricians towards urologists and heart surgeons. And Amit has promised me a cut, a rebate in my charges as I move along. But then I can't say no to him. He kept you all waiting because he believes in the North Calcutta principle that until the bus is full, it doesn't start. I have to thank the Prostrate Cancer Foundation for organizing this awareness campaign. All of us suffer from this hidden fears about what will actually get us. So we make life so wide that there is a choice of which one will actually get you to the grave. But this is this campaign is required because it brings in a consciousness. And I had very little clue about it until I started losing friends to it. Very little. We lost some of my very good friends to this deadly disease. They fought back, but it was just too late. Now, I am not going to speak on prostate cancer. I am not a doctor, mercifully. And I will just concentrate on a few aspects of old age to relate some of the thoughts that go within us. You see, old age has been a fascinatingly difficult problem for us to accept. I am not sure whether anyone on earth welcomes old age, though Amit said we should look forward to it, and I also feel. If you look back to our history, you will see that the story of Jajati, that comes to my mind first, where he was keen to pass on his old age to his own son, and he actually managed to do so. Now, these transfers are not applicable in the post-Puranic, post-Mahabharata age. You don't have surrogates to suffer for you. You suffer yourself. Now, this also reminds me of another story from the Greek legends, where you have Tithonius, a character in Greek history, who also struggles with his problems of old age. So we have seen that this problem is not of the making of doctors, so to say, because many of the problems of health are actually came on the surface when they started telling us that this was wrong with us. Until then, we thought we'd move on. Now, Tithonius had this strange craving to remain young, and his wife was more interested in that. Mercifully, mine would rather see me age gracefully than be open to competition. And she has made those intentions very clear, and I greatly appreciate it. So, which means that I don't have to struggle to look young or paint my hair or stuff like that. Now, his mate, not his wife, so to say, Eos was very keen to hold him back, and he prayed to the gods that give him a long life. So the gods accepted him and gave him a long life. She forgot to ask that the long youthful life. So she had to put up with an old dithering man for a very long time. I am sure many of you will have to do the same. The more interesting character that comes to my mind before I get on to things more serious is another Greek character called Geras or Geras. Geras is a god. The Greeks had more gods than the Indians. In fact, I submit rather strongly that idolatry in India was introduced by the Greeks. We did not have a single idol in India, single image in India before the Greeks came. We had a lot of poetic imagination in the Rig Veda. We had a lot of imagination. We never had a formed god. But the Greeks and we have this old relationships going, and they had more gods than us. We had a quick god of death called Yam. they had intermediate gods, like ICU, ITU. So you had intermediate stages of ventilator. So you had all this, and this god in particular was known as Geras. Now this gentleman appears in Indo-European literature elsewhere also, and his contribution to the language remains in the word geriatrics. See the similarity between our tongues. When the ancient branch of treating old age was known as Jawhar Sircar. Jaro, Jera, they come from the same root words. Now, this is not linguistic, so let me proceed. 30 years ago, there were no aged economies in the world in which consumption by older people surpassed that of the youth. That is roughly the definition of an older economy. In 2010, there were 23 aged economies. 23 economies where a largely non-producing class was dominating. By 2040, this will be 89 countries in the world. Japan is today the only country where more than 30% of its population is aged 60 and above. By 2050, I'll hopefully have gone. There will be 64 countries where older people will make up more than 30% of the world population. In other words, we will, in a few years, 7 to 10 years, we'll have 1 billion older persons worldwide. We have 7 billion humans right now, and as you move to less than 7.5, you'll have more than 1 billion who are old. By 2050, nearly 80% of the world's older persons will live in developing countries, and China and India will contribute the most. So, the United Nations took early call on this, and in Vienna, it held its first World Assembly on the Aging. They formulated a package of recommendations from the United Nations, which came out in '87. The plan of action was international exchange and research cooperation, as well as data collection, because age has a lot to do with the culture, with the physical aspect and the conditioning aspect, that is response aspect of culture. Both have a very strong bearing on how you face your age, face old age. And because the different cultures have promoted different response systems to how we treat, how we are supposed to deal with each problem, and many of them have worked eminently. The fact was that till a century ago, most of us left by the time we were 60, or even before that. So geriatrics was supposed to be mainly a theoretical problem. Now it is practical. International exchange and research, and a rational basis for future social policies. Now the social policy of a nation also decides how the nation per se is going to treat this bracket. The phenomenon of population aging is becoming a major concern of the policymakers all the world over for both developed and developing nations in the last 2 decades. I have myself witnessed a lot of concern. But the problems arising have varied implications for the 3 classes of underdeveloped, developed, and developing nations. The United Nations Population Fund and HelpAge India, which was one of the first bodies to get into this act, they marked an International Day for Older Persons on 1st of October, said that about 90 million elderly persons in India were in India in 2011, and expected to grow up to 173 million by 26. More interesting than that are the statistics that 30 million people, old people, are living alone. 3 crores living all alone, and 90% above 60 have to work for a living, which is what I keep explaining to my wife, that one has to work. I'm on the trend, I don't walk the trend, so I'm working for a living as long as I can walk. And This will go up, and nearly 3 out of every 5 older women are very poor. In India, there's an interesting statistics that when you look at the age above 60, it's 60% are women. 60% of the survivors after 60 are women, which is one of the reasons why we had to operate on different systems. And one of the systems that, a very cruel system that Bengal was capable of devising, was to send these women, much before their old age of course, hoping that they will live up to their old age in Vrindavan and Mathura. I'll deviate from the topic for a minute because it's one of my favorite subjects. Do you know why Bengal had this terrible curse of sending its widows to Mathura and Vrindavan? It's a paradox in law. When Hindu legal systems were being codified in the medieval period, all of India chose Mitakshara, which left the woman out of the share of property. There was only one state that decided to go on a women's rights issue, and that was called Daibhag. And Daibhag was a property system that permitted the woman a share in the property. Now, as long as all of you are living in the forest like Kalketu and living a simple life of Hullora, everything is all right. But the moment you come into when you come into more civilized forms of economies and you come into contact and there's an aggregation of wealth, especially after the late Mughal period, the early colonial period, and of course during the British regime, the wealth in the family of the rentier classes especially called for certain solutions, because under the existing Hindu system, polygamy was permitted and preferred where the Kulins were concerned. So you went on accumulating wives, and some of them many years younger than you, and you were leaving them for taking a share of the property. Apart from being threats from other points of view, you don't have single woman in a joint household moving around. So they had these problems, but the short point here is that if Bengal did not have a compulsory division of property for women, maybe these women would have been spared both Sati and Mathura Vrindavan. It's a postulate on which I've worked, but I thought that I could bring it in here. And by 2050, India will be home to 1 out of every 6 of the world's older persons. We are now 1/7, a little more than 1/7 of the universe. As per the last census, there were about 13 crores above 60. Now, getting too much into statistics, I'll leave that all for these next people. The problems of old age need to be looked upon separately, both for the two genders. I'm sorry, the gender does matter here. That's one. It also needs a separate look from the Bengal Club, Calcutta Club of Way of Looking at Life, which means a certain degree of assured economic status versus those who are totally vulnerable to it. Now, India has a very interesting statistics, that is 66% of its population is below 35. Nowhere in the world do we have such a young population. That means the dominant sector of India's population is below 35. And there's a large segment which is below between 40-42, what we call chokras. Now, they account for such a large population, whereas just less than 5%, 6% is above 65. So we have these, but the ruling, those who decide on public policy are the upper age bracket. So we have a contradiction that's running, And many of the frustrations that you see that come out through the social media, many of the other forms of sudden outbursts, are because we are not permitting the youth group of youth to participate in the decision making except by casting a vote once in 5 years. That is another point. So which means, but then we have these perennial things going on, and one of the major issues at which public policymakers look is which is the group that we need to cater, which is a group that would deserve more attention. And obviously in a democracy you go by numbers, and therefore there is a swing now towards the younger group. But then let us not get so serious about the young and the old. I keep saying there's only one issue on which we differ, major. The young think the old are fools. The old know the young are fools. That's one major issue. Now, getting back to a little seriousness, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment went in for a national policy on older persons with guidelines for state governments. This came out in 1999. I'm sure that no one in this hall has ever heard about it. That speaks about a tendency that I've noticed for over 40 years in government, where I've been there for no fault of mine. I've noticed that, most of the good work that government does is covered under the Official Secrets Act. You're not supposed to know. That's one. Number two is the more senior you get, the more guidelines you give. The more guidelines you give. Your work ends by giving guidelines, saying that, look, this is the distilled wisdom that I've had from my experience, and therefore this is a guideline. I mean, there is nothing by way of implementation. So you have a guideline which talks about state governments, and the state government's relation with the center. I was telling Dr. Mukhopadhyay, I've done 16 years for the state in the secretariat, 16 years for the center, and 9 years in the districts. That's my. So I can give you an equally balanced one. One of the genetic faults of the IAS is that when they are in the districts, they complain about the secretariat, wherever that is located, either in Dalhousie Square or across the river, it doesn't matter. The secretariat consists of non-feeling, unfeeling persons who don't know what to do with the world. And when they are in the secretariat, they complain against the central government. That these guys are having a fun time, they are completely detached from reality, and when they are in the center, they keep talking of inefficient state governments. So the cycle goes on. It's like the soap operas of Saas Bahu serial. You really don't know who's right. The major components of this program are to establish geriatric departments in 8 regional centers and strengthening healthcare facilities at a level of 100 districts. This is only for the sake of bringing you to the official policy. This is to be expanded during the 12th five-year plan. It's written in the 12th five-year plan ends in March. So that speaks a lot about our seriousness. I would like to draw the focused attention of this audience not to the variety of health problems and how to live with it in old age. I'm sure all of you have come up with your own solutions or will be forced to do so. One can still be prepared to tackle better known ailments like obesity, which we cover with our dresses. Now, Ina, don't look like that. The sari, for instance, is one of the most skillful instruments which can hide what you want to hide and reveal what you want to reveal. I have never seen such a wonderful, and all the women I have met from outside have come up with this IPR, this royalty earning invention. Men, unfortunately, who adopted the Western dress have to keep adjusting their waistline up to a point. But anyway, let's cut it out. We all know that Indians are genetically endowed to be barrel-shaped. So we worship the picture, if you notice, everywhere. So never mind. So ailments like obesity, diabetes, my mother at 85, 86 has 2 Rosagullas every day. Nothing happens to her. I have 4 Rosagullas and they say my blood sugar has shot up. So it's all got to do with it. We can still, osteoarthritis, all of us have it. And where bureaucrats are concerned, there are again 2 programmed sessions of osteoarthritis. One is weak knees, which I have, and the other is no back, a back problem. So osteoarthritis you can still tackle, and even the steadily receding efficiency of vital organs. One can get along and get along still. But the 3 villains of the piece, and I have a little serious here, are cerebrovascular accidents, which is word for a stroke, cardiac blockages and arrests. We keep trying Doppler tests, this and that, but when it hits you, it does. And cancer that looms large. The last is a matter of dread to most, because it's practically a no-win game. So one of the heartening things that I learned by taking this flight to Calcutta for just half a day is Amit and his group say it's curable. So they better walk the talk. But they are equally dangerous for the young, all the 3 that I have mentioned. So they are not age-specific. One of the few diseases that is really age-specific, which is one of the reasons why I've come over, is prostate cancer. It's one of the most commonly diagnosed cancer among Western men. And it is a gender-specific disease. So a woman can be rest assured that it's not going to come in their direction and men can worry their head off. Though cases are lower in India than in the US or Scandinavian countries, the incidence of prostate cancer is increasing at 2.5% every year. The death rate from prostate cancer in US is 19%. 1 out of 5 die. In India, it's almost half, 45%. That is a source of worry. The reported incidence of prostatic carcinoma in India is 6 out of 1 lakh. But the increased migration and increased changes of our lifestyle are bringing in some amount of increase every year. I have a feeling that we really need to go back to the drawing board and study as to whether our ancient systems of squatting on the floor and eating. I'm sure that half the hall will not be able to sit down on the floor and eat anymore. Squatting on the floor and eating every day, sitting on the floor and writing on a bench, or the original toilet that we had, which the British derided as chicken postured and brought in that seat postured, are responsible for more arthritic and other problems, related problems, than anything else. But then this is just a contribution to the discourse. Prostate cancer incidence is highest among the metro cities. Delhi is the second among the cancers. Mumbai is the 3rd most common cancer. Kolkata, the 2nd most common cancer. Chennai, 4th most common, and goes on. Bangalore is 3rd common. Screening is not routinely available in India, and that's one point we need to get through. 90% of the patients who are discovered for prostate cancer are at an advanced stage. A PSA test, if there's a family history especially, and a digital rectal examination are an absolute necessity. And here I would speak on behalf of the foundation. There are many other issues associated with old age, but what is most alarming is a steady and silent breakdown of our traditional support system. The support system was not only in terms of welfare, care, health, but emotional support and social respect. That is broken down, both in the first it happened with the joint family, then even in a nuclear family. Among the educated and mobile classes, this occurs, as all of us know, due to the migration or even permanent settlement of children in different stations, including overseas. This means that their support could range from an occasional telephone call, some amount of financial support, and I'm shocked to see how literate people treat their parents. Even this is often withdrawn. Or even engagement of paid menials to look after, nurses to look after their children, for parents, if they are lucky. We happen to be, and this is again one of my, I'm sure you'll agree with this observation. I'm not talking to those young ladies on my right, but I'm talking about the vast majority of the audience. I'm talking of people above 50 here, are the only generation perhaps in the world that were scolded by their parents and are scolded by their children. We have to listen to both their parents, we have to listen to both the children. The next generation will decide on its own course of action. I repeat, every generation has the fundamental right to make its own mistakes. Let us leave it to them. They'll come to their own solutions, but we happen to be that intermediate generation that was terrified of parents and are more concerned about Sonamuni. So, especially if it's a male child. Now, we are in that stage when you have this state welfare safety net completely ripped apart with no chances of the support system of children getting back, almost no chances. In fact, I see more women going back and looking after their mothers, parents, and that is something that really interests us. The fact of marriage as a separation of a different household, my mother used to say, son is son until he gets a wife, daughter is daughter all through her life. Family welfare safety net has broken down, but the state of society's welfare net is not in position as in the Western countries. So you're caught in that cleft, and we have to come up with our own strategies. We can't wait for the state to wake up because it has other priorities to look at. I have just a small suggestion before I end. We have to look at it very scientifically and unemotionally. I mentioned one strategy which I have been mentioning to my senior friends who have kept a flat up there or are looking after the house. They have earned for it, they have slaved for it, they had inherited it, they have spent after it, waiting for the kids to return, who may come back for a week a year, but would perhaps prefer to stay in a hotel. If that is so, reverse mortgage is one of the solutions. For those who are not aware, reverse mortgage simply means that you can mortgage your existing flat or building or house to a bank that hereinafter pays you a fat monthly income until you or your partner cease to live, after which the bank gets it. It's a bit of a combination of insurance, it's a combination of forecasting, so they have this. That solves one problem, two problems in one stroke. You don't keep an empty place, or you don't worry your head off whether the Ramakrishna Mission is going to accept that house. In most cases they don't. And you have an assured income. These are some of the strategies that I would say, because the old age is on us and we have to think about it. There's no way one can escape by saying, I'm looking young. That is not a solution. That is an apparition. In simple language means that the property one has built up, inherited or occupied can be mortgaged to the bank. The reverse mortgage gives economic stability, funds for health care, which is the reason why I'm speaking, and a practical way of accepting reality. There are other strategies one can work on, because I am not going to get into the medical strategy or the others of other health and non-health economic issues. We have gone over it enough. We would now wait for more interesting things like Vikram to come up with his band. You need a bit of cotton wool if you want. I've seen this kid grow up, so I can tell you he's one of the best. In my opinion, one of the three best, as I put it. And before he starts bajaving our band, let me summarize that one has to prepare, get used to the thought that we will age, and prepare while we are still young. And young means up to 65 we are young, which gives you one more year. And that also reminds me of two rather young men who tried their luck out at 64. One was a poet about whom I can't speak here, who was influenced by an Argentinian lady at 64 and went on, took up painting. And the other was Imran Khan, who made this deal. So there is still scope for a lot of imaginative thinking. I will close by saying that I sincerely feel that youth is a wonderful thing, but the tragedy is that it is wasted on the youth. Thank you very much.